Hey everybody, my name is Bradley Sides, and I want to thank you for joining us for our Southern Summer Book Club here at Southern Review of Books. Today I'm chatting with Spencer K.M. Brown, author of our August selection, Slowfire. Here's more information about our featured writer, and I'll be right back with Spencer. Spencer K.M. Brown is an award-winning novelist and poet, a finalist for the CMA National Book Awards, and winner of the Penelope Niven Award and the Flying South Fiction Prize. His work has been nominated 5 times for the Pushcart Prize and has appeared in numerous literary journals and magazines. He's the author of the novels Move Over Mountain and Hold Fast. He lives in the foothills of North Carolina with his wife and 3 sons. Slowfire is his first collection of stories. Welcome back, everybody. Spencer, it's good to see you. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course, of course. So I have several questions for you. You ready to jump into them?
Let's do it.
All right. So one of the things I want to start with was I just love to talk to other story writers about which stories they really like and admire. So for you, like Spencer K. Brown version of Great American Stories, what's out there for you?
Ooh, good question. I think I fell in love with the short story form, honestly, with Edgar Allan Poe. And
Hmm.
so as a kid, it was kind of those dark, weird, twisty stories that just intrigued me from beginning to end. But take a story like The House of Usher, though, there was a lot more at play than just like that gothic. And then you get to the point of the guys, clawing out of the wall. Sorry, spoiler alert for anyone. But it's like there's just something more there. And so that kind of led me into other writers. But more importantly, to inform my writing career, I would say Dennis Johnson had a huge influence. I came across him just randomly reading a magazine in a waiting room one time, and that was he blew my mind with what you could do in a short space. And I think some of the best short story writers, Misha Marin had one a couple years ago in Oxford American, and it was just like I think it was called Tip, and man, was it brutal
Yeah.
but beautiful, and all of these things all at once, and it was really cool to see. So, great American stories. There's a lot of good writers, and if I start listing them, I'm going to leave someone out. So I don't want to do that.
Yeah, that
but
sounds like something I would do too. Just
oh
straight.
yeah, yeah. I call it blockbuster syndrome, where you
Yeah.
walk into Blockbuster, you're like, I haven't. Oh, if anyone remembers that, but you're like, I don't know what I want to watch, and there's everything there. But yeah, there's so many great writers. But I think a really, it's just a great form of
Yeah.
literature, and I've always been a huge fan of it. And so I'm glad that I was able to put this one together. But um, I think to see writers doing cool things with a short amount of space, especially flash fiction,
Yeah.
and how much gravity a line, a word can hold is really, really neat to see what people are doing with that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Okay, so let's talk about your book, Slow Fire. So I know a lot of people watching or listening have probably read your book, but for those who haven't, do you mind introducing it just a little bit for us, please?
Sure. Yeah. It's a collection. I think it's 14 stories in there. And the topics vary and characters vary, but it's more or less set in the rural South. I'm from North Carolina, so it tends to be this kind of made up world that I made called New Oxford. And I don't ever really name that. I don't think of the stories, but it's kind of this region. And for me, at least, that was the kind of way I could make sense of place, especially encapsulating all these different characters and all that. But um, generally, they kind of weave between brothers, father and son relationships, mothers and sons, and familial relationships, but also those kind of ties with the land, especially broken ties. So maybe, past generations really owned, worked, whatever on the land. And now some people are just kind of left with it. And what are you left to do with that? Who are you left to be in this town that's kind of vanishing? And what's your purpose? So that's was my interest in kind of collecting these stories together.
Yeah, and I know you've written other books before. You have some novels, you have story or poems, but this is your first story collections, and I'm curious about kind of what was your period of time in which you put all these stories together? Was it recent, or is this a long kind of history that you have of writing stories?
Yeah, I think I started first writing stories. I think probably any writer probably starts out writing stories that are some good, some not so good. And I used to, gather up my stories and tape them all together and give them to my dad and say, like, Happy Father's Day, Dad. I hope you enjoyed these stories.
Yeah.
And so kind of working from that idea of these short little snippets. But for this one, I think the first one that's included in this collection I wrote in 2016. So that's about 10 years ago now. And it was the first moment that I realized, like, this is my voice. This is who I am as a writer and what I want to do. And it was kind of a cool moment. So I was glad that it kind of was able to be included in this collection. And I love that story. And I think that kind of opened up this realm of that. And so over the years, stories were always the thing I came back to after a longer project or in between, life stuff and life events and all of that. And it was always a way, it was almost like a homecoming to come to a story for me, and a good way to just get something out, but slowly, as I was realizing I want to put together a collection of them, there was a kind of a coherent theme. They weren't all the same. They were all, in fact, drastically different, but there was a through line of, for me, it's almost like what I see as a color. It sounds weird, but it's almost a color moving through it, like a fog of something that felt like it's the same air they're all breathing through all these stories. And so even, I think when I submitted it to my publisher, I think there were maybe 20 stories in it. And we kind of winnowed it down to say, not a bad story, but it just doesn't fit with these other ones. So getting to that process of saying, all right, how did these fit together? What's the through line? And I think we found a really, really good balance with that. And as a writer, I'm very close. I love all my characters. I love all the stories, but really to step back and say, these ones matter in this sequence. And that, because I want to make a coherent vision of it, an experience of beginning to end reading the book. But yeah, I think stories it's a different beast. It really is than a novel. You can work years on a novel and you have 400 pages to make mistakes and do all this stuff and go on digressions about sandwiches or anything else. But a story, you really don't have that time. You got to make every word count. And I like that pressure, honestly, as a writer. So
I like what you said about the color throughout, because it made me think about, it's something that I kind of mentioned earlier before we recorded, but it was this idea of like a really strong collection. And when I read Slowfire, I was like, this story's very good, this story's very good, this story's very good. But as a whole, I was like, this comes together so well because it all fits. I was thinking about recent stuff by like Julia Elliott's Hellions, I thought was a collection that fit really well together. Andrew Busby's recent collection, Andrew Segrist's debut collection, I thought did this. I could go, George Singleton does this really well, but with yours, like as a whole, yeah, like it fit together. But I wondered if you would talk about the movement from story to story, because it's not just a good collection, but it moves really well as each story builds. So we talk about how you kind of put it together in that kind of way.
Yeah, that's a really hard thing for me. I mean, I think this is where it's a shout out to my editor and publisher, because I think every writer needs a really, really good editor and a good publisher. And being on both sides of it in the industry, there's a huge value to both. And sometimes as a writer, you just have this raw mess and you're like, can someone please help me make sense of this? I need help. I have something here, but I just, we got to work around it. And then as an editor, you're like, oh, I can see something here. Let's, help pin it back. And I think with this story collection, because of the distance of time I was as a writer over the years, writing it, different projects coming back, I think some of that distance for myself helped me realize not all these stories are great. They're not all there. And it's almost, I've had some buddies who are in the film industry, but it's kind of like, you have this long 3-hour film. It's like, we got to pare it back down, because what's the one that you want to show? Like, what do you want to tell? What is that through line again? And I think kind of editing those down to that was the point. But then arrangement is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
And coming from like somewhat of a poetry background and editing poetry, it makes a huge difference. I mean, what
Mhm.
the book opens with to where what's in the middle to where what's at the end, that, yeah, you could open up the collection and read any story, and I hope it's really enjoyable. But if you read it beginning to end, I hope there's a different layer to it. And as a writer, I'm really interested in layers in that way of,
Yep.
you have a narrative, sure, and you have a voice, but if you look again, there should be, in a successful story, in my opinion, there should be at least a couple more that are there that you have to kind of search out. And so I wanted that feeling throughout the entire collection, and I think my publisher really, really got that, and he helped me to get to that place of understanding even what I was trying to do. That you can't almost express it in words. You're like, I have this feeling, and he's like, I think it's this, and you're like,
Yeah.
I think it is that, and you kind of follow that through. And even reading it and rereading it with this story here, this one here, and it's like, that doesn't fit. There's something, broken. And so we found a good match. And it's probably not perfect, because no art is ever going to be perfect, but you're searching and you're reaching for that light. Like, I think Cormac McCarthy said that you're always searching for that light. And we got pretty close on this one. I'm very happy with the way it turned out. So
Yeah, you should be. I think it just works really well as a collection from front to end. It's very nicely put together. You mentioned this idea of layering, and that's something I wanted to ask you about because if you look, the first story in the collection is just a fantastic story. It's
thanks.
about this small town boxer. He's looking for, poor guy's looking for all kinds of stuff. He's looking for love. He's trying to figure out home. He's trying to figure out himself. He's trying to figure out his relationship with the land. I mean, and I could go on. Like, it's a story that has a lot of elements to it. Um, but will you talk a little bit about, for writing that story and others if you want to, just kind of your process as a writer? I guess, do you naturally go into the stories and you're like, I'm going to write a story that touches on blah, 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 and have these things you're going for? Or are you shooting more for, I'm going to write one draft and then I'm going to come in with a second draft that's going to build up this element and, just that kind of general structure of building?
I really wish I were an author who could say, I want to tackle loneliness today, and I'm going to write the best story. That would be awesome. I do
Me
think
too.
about those, yeah, those kind of themes, and they do run throughout my work, and I am interested in them. And I think it's awesome if someone can do that, because I'm not that smart. Usually, what happens for me, um, I almost feel like I'm a subject to something else, that it comes into my head, and I get this image, and it's there. And so for that one, I'm bound to leave this dark behind. There was this image I had of this guy, and he's just sitting next to his dad, and like, kind of this, you could just see it on his face, like all hope is lost, and yet he doesn't want to tell his dying father that, and yet they both know it, and there's this just silence between them, and they're talking about everything else under the sun but that. So I had this kind of glimpse of that, and which seems really dark. It's really not that bleak, I don't think, um, but I think that's a beautiful moment of connection. They both know each other so well that they're not going to say the thing that might hurt the other one,
Yeah.
because they just want to be right there together. And so that story kind of took shape from there. And to be honest, I wrote a whole novel of it, and so it was about 350 pages of that. And I said, this as a whole, it's just not working. It's just not doing what it is. There's too much being said. And I think there's a lot to be, I was putting too many words in the silent where there should have been silence. And so I think by paring it down and getting it to story shape, it really brought out the character more.
Mhm.
Eli, the main character in that story, I mean, in the one sense, he's kind of a son of a bitch. Sorry to cuss, but he's real. He's lousy. He's a lousy friend, lousy son, lousy all of this. And yet at odd moments, he finds conviction and he finds who he is. And I think that's what the story is about. And it took that many pages to write out to realize who he was.
Mhm.
Um, and so those layers of a person, I think, in a character, that's what makes a character real. It makes them,
Yeah.
not static. They're very, very dynamic. And even the ones that come in for a page, I'm like, why are they here? What are they doing? And they better be dynamic. And I really wish I could say I invented that. I created that. But the way I view writing is I'm listening. I'm listening to those characters as they come, filtering through my experience, sure, everything I've read, absolutely. But there's a cool moment that happens in that state of writing that you're following it. And that's the best kind of writing to me. And Eli was excellent to follow. He was fun. And even all the other side characters, there's a lot of characters in that little short story. And it's vast in that way. But I was happy with the layers of it. I think the best stories, one I can think of particularly is The Paper Hanger by William Gay. Yeah. Man, that story is simple on the surface, and then you go back and back and back, and you're like, "Whoa, there's blows my mind every time." It's like, how does that happen? And I think, and I don't even know if a writer is conscious of it, but it's kind of like a poem in that way of truth is just there, and there's layers to that. There's nuance in between all of those things, and that's what makes it so fun to write, but also to read and to participate in. So, yeah.
You mentioned this idea of images, with stories and that kind of thing. Do you feel like that's how you're always kind of getting your ideas, is through images come to you and you're writing toward that image, or is it just this particular story?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time I would say, especially for fiction, images. Oddly enough, for poetry, it's specific lines and arrangement of words. But for stories, for another story in the collection, Green Valley Motel on Patterson Street, I just had this image of this kind of, rough looking lady sitting outside of an open motel room door, and it's just kind of crappy. And she's just sitting out there smoking, and the door is open behind her and it's cold. But she's kind of like serene. And you're just like, well, how could anyone be serene in that moment? And it's just a weird, you're a writer, you know what I mean? Like, you just see it so clearly and nothing else. And so you have to sit down and you have to follow it through and write it. And that's the creative process of that. But what's cool that comes out of it are all those themes that we were just talking about. I've been thinking a lot about loneliness, about grief, about whatever it might be. How do I make sense of that? And oddly enough, if I think a good writer is kind of in tune to themselves of following that through, it's your subconscious kind of telling you, not an answer. I don't know if I've ever found an answer, but it has opened up a whole new world and a way of looking at things through kind of this empathetic gaze. And that's the most beautiful part about it. Honestly, it's really fun. And so, images come, but then specific language, and I've rewritten sentences. She wouldn't say it that way. And it's almost as if the character's slapping you saying, I wouldn't say that. What do you do? and I used to think I had to write, being from the South, I had to write in a dialect. And so early on I was like, I have to, cut all my G's and all this. And my wife was reading one of my stories before we got married. She was like, why are you writing like that? You don't write like that. Like, you don't speak like that. I was like, well, I don't have to. I don't have to copy anyone. You could just make it normal. But it's being true to the form, but also to the character. And that sounds odd because they're fictional. You made them up, but also you didn't make them up. It's a weird balance of that. It's very real in your own head. But
yeah. You've talked a couple of times about poetry a little bit. I know you have background working with poetry. I'm curious how that plays into your fiction in different ways. Do you feel like it's something that really helps you write stories, or do you feel like sometimes it's a drawback having that ability to be so poetic?
I think some past editors would say, say that, like, would tell me, hey, what's with all this language? But I think one thing I love about poetry is the ability to withhold in the moment. Sometimes you want to overexpress, and I think especially with some sentimental moments that could be overly done. And honestly, that's the most poetic thing about Hemingway's writing, is his ability to withhold what we all know already. And I think good poets can do that, and they talk about almost everything else beside the moment right before you. And I really like that aspect. So I think from a poetic standpoint, that's kind of an idea that I incorporate, or try to at least, into my fiction. And I think elevates it in a different way of, at least for my stories, not saying that everyone's story should do that or be like that, but I'm more interested in talking about what caused that feeling than the feeling itself, what brought you to that moment. And I think good poetry does that. But now if you're talking about the language or paragraph breaks or getting into weird craft stuff like that, I think that also matters deeply to the story of how the language on a page can balance the image you're drawing. It's like a twofold. It's incredible sometimes that a sentence, every word can be perfect, and those words chosen are perfect for describing that image of what's there before you, and that's a cool moment. And so I think poets are really good at, they'll be thinking about a line for date, they'll be thinking about a word or a comma or a semicolon that makes a huge difference, can change everything. So when it comes to fiction, you have a little bit more wiggle room, of course,
Yeah.
but personally, I take every line and word just as seriously as if I'm writing a poem. I try to, at least. I was going back through and I could have cut some, but yeah, but I try to. And sometimes it just how it has to be said. And if you can come to that point of like, I wish it were different. I really wish I could use pretty language here, but it
Yeah.
doesn't call for that, and this scene calls for something brutal. And this one calls for something beautiful. And so you have to be a good listener of the voice there.
Do you ever have, whenever you're writing a poem or you're writing a story or I guess even a novel, do you ever have those moments where you start out writing in one form, but then you're like, no, that's not right. And then it turns out being something totally different with, like you've started a poem and it turns into a story or vice versa?
Honestly, I haven't had that yet.
Hmm.
Um, I've never sat out and said, today I'm going to write a poem or
Hmm.
today I'm going to write a story. And if I'm working on a longer piece, that's a little bit different. If I'm writing a longer story or a novel or anything like that, I'm in it. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, in a 2 or 3 month period, it's every day and it's done. And I
Wow.
kind of like that fever dream of that process. Um, and usually they're pretty distinct. Now, while I'm working on a lot longer project, I will have written poems
Hmm.
along the same themes, but really that's kind of almost to like through a lens of a character making sense of something, and it's completely distant and separate. But I'm not. I do like kind of mixing work of sometimes I'll take stuff from a story and put it into a book or vice versa. Three of the stories became longer works, but they started out as short stories.
Hmm.
And I think they worked as short stories very well, but there was just more to be told in my head.
Yeah.
um, but there is crossover. I mean, certain lines will come back, certain words I've noticed over time. It's usually other people pointing out, like, "Hey, you use that word here, and also that same image here." I'm like,
Yeah.
"No, I know, I'm not very smart. Like, I'll keep doing that." But it's usually me trying to figure out what I mean by that half the
Yeah.
time.
I understand that. I
Oh yeah,
fully
yeah.
understand that. Talk about, I'm always interested in labels that we get as writers. Like we're this kind of writer, blah, blah, blah. For you, I kind of put the label of Southern Gothic as I was reading through the book. Are you, do you take that label? Do you not think you're a Southern Gothic writer? What do you think?
Man, I'll take that any day. No, I think that's so cool. And what's funny is that it came kind of full circle that my first love of reading was Gothic literature. I
Yeah.
mean, especially 19th century. Still to this day, my one of my favorite novels is Dracula. And it's a fine book, it's
Mhm.
whatever. But if you really read it and get into it, it's beautiful. It's so deep in all this. Frankenstein's fine. It's not one of my favorites. I think that's up for debate. We can go on Goodreads about that. But I think there's something about the Gothic which is so cool, and I've always been drawn to that just from way back. And maybe it's where I grew up or my family or whatever. Um, and to be honest, there's something about religion that also has this element of sublime beauty right beside horror
Yeah.
in this way, right? And so, and I think that there's something just so incredible about that. Um, I think it was David Lynch who had one of his films. He had like a character opens a fridge and like there's a human hand in there right next to like mayonnaise and like
Yeah.
turkey and stuff. It's like, what is this? How does a human mind make sense of that? And what's cool about Gothic literature is that we become so numb to our day-to-day life, the everyday, that Gothic literature kind of calls us back to it by bringing something absurd into the scene.
Mhm.
And so to answer your question fully, I've always been interested in that as a writer, of mixing the beauty with the decay, and slowly, especially the story collection that's kind of come out in that way. So I'll hopefully do a good job of that, of living up to that title. The new novel I have coming out next year is very much a Southern Gothic, and that was kind of on the outset. I was like, I want to write a good story in this lineage, and so there's some things that you pay attention to and you're kind of conscious of, but the rest of it kind of comes out in this really neat way, and that's the best Gothic literature in my mind. So
Yeah. I've with I- as I was reading, I was of course thinking about other writers as well. Like I'm always thinking about what this reminds me of. And you've mentioned like Dennis Johnson and William Gay as being people you've, kind of looked up to. Do you feel like your writing is kind of in conversation with those people, or do you see your writings being more in conversation with other writers? What's your take on that?
yeah, no, I think uh, I'm a huge fan of reading and then putting that reading into my own writing. So sometimes, I mean, I used to write my own version of the same story. So I would take the same idea, and don't send it out as your own or anything, but you're thinking through the idea in your own way. And I
Yeah.
think that's really cool writing. And so, after you find your voice as a writer and what you want to do, I love putting in little lines or little nods to the people that's so inspired me as a writer or as a reader. And especially in moments of, it could be a philosophical debate, and so there's a little nod to Dostoevsky in one little line. Or I think in I'm Bound to Leave This Dark Behind, there's a little line to Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald in there, and it's not verbatim, but it's close enough to the line that I was like, it's the same thing that all these characters are going through, this kind of despairing moment, and what do you do with that? And so I kind of like that personally. And if readers and other authors can find it, I'm like, yeah, that's that conversation continuing on. They've shown me this part of the way, and I always viewed it kind of. I would love to I always wanted to imitate all these writers, O'Connor and Walker Percy and all these other guys, uh, and then one day I was like, I don't want to imitate. I want to sit at the table with. I want to take that conversation and add something to it. And so my goal was not to describe a South that everyone else has described. It's been done. But what I could do is describe the South that I know and where I grew up through my lens, which is very specific, which is different than yours, different than anyone else's. And I think that's the authentic nature of a good writer: is be true to yourself first and foremost, to your place. Don't imitate. You can nod, but and steal some lines every now and then, but don't try to be something you're not. Be true to that.
You mentioned kind of your South a little bit, and one of the things that I really liked about this book was how much it plays into this. It plays into the different worlds in which the characters are in, right? There's a lot of smoke, there's a lot of like smoke, snow going on. There's kind of foggy kind of settings. You have animals around. There's just an abundance, really, of the natural world kind of at play throughout the book. I was just curious, like how much of this is you being out in the world? Like it felt to me as a reader, like this is where you're comfortable, is outside among all this. But for you, what was your um relate?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, I grew up in King, North Carolina, so it's pretty rural, back of fields and farms and everywhere else. And we were lucky enough to grow up in a neighborhood, but right behind our neighborhood would be, I mean, 30 acres of a
Mhm.
cow pasture with rolling hills and then tobacco fields and all of this. And so we used to just explore. And we had a beautiful big I mean, a creek big enough that you could swim in and go into, and it was awesome. And so that's kind of my childhood was in that place. And so wandering through those hills and everything, I was in love. And lucky enough, I was homeschooled growing up. So I would finish my work early in the morning, play some drums and then go out. And I was gone most of the day out in the woods. And you're just, for me, I was always just curious as a kid. And I'm still curious now. I like to be an observer and just watch and see how things move and grow. And so over the years, especially going away for college and coming back and seeing how things have come and gone, the same field is now a big development. So there's $500,000 houses now back there.
Yeah.
The creek is somehow shrinked, and that's wild. The cows are gone, and they're selling out. And so you see these things change in the time and place. When I was a kid, there was a big fire up on the Sourtown Mountains, and so we literally watched it burn for a while. And I was like, that's crazy. And they called it a controlled burn or whatever. Who knows if it was? It might have been, but just to witness as a kid, you're like watching the sky burn, and it was wild.
Okay.
And so those things kind of always stuck with me. And I think even as a kid, I remember thinking, this can't be this way forever. I mean, someone's going to do something. And it honestly, when my favorite basketball card shop, it was this trailer in the middle of this parking lot, and the lady owned the whole lot behind her, and it was like a dirt field, just nothing in the middle of town. And she owned this baseball card shop, and she sold it, and they put up a Wendy's. And I remember I was 15 years old. I was like, that's the end of the town. As soon as Wendy's comes in, like everything's going to be gone, because this lady who happened to own like 2 acres of just this dirt patch right by the highway, like, and then suddenly it was like, then they got a Walmart, they got these things. And so industry moves in, and it's not bad. They're fine things that people will use, and there's some good to it, but you miss that wide open space. And yeah, so it's hard to see it go. It really is, and it's just different. Just different.
Absolutely. We only have a couple minutes left, but you mentioned your upcoming book. It comes out next year, right?
Yeah. So it's called Recommendations for a Departing Soul, and it's a Southern Gothic novel about two brothers trying to bury their mom, and their uncle comes in to kind of help, but it has some magical realism in it and some good Southern Gothic themes. That's coming out from Regal House in next fall. So
next fall, great. I look forward to reading it. Sounds like my kind of thing. The magical realism mixed with the Southern Gothic. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Spencer, thank you for your time. It's good to talk to you. Y'all, if you haven't read the book yet, it's Slowfire. It's out now. Be sure to check it out. It's been a pleasure to read with y'all this summer, and I hope you have a great rest of the summer. But I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Have a good one. Thank you.